You know what, we're going to do something a little different. Why don't you open your Bibles if you have it with you, if you brought one. If not, they're on the pew there, on the rack on page 734 is where we're going to be today. The scripture's also in the bulletin you got in the YouVersion Bible app. Under the events, it's there. It's as many places as we can possibly put it. It's also on the screen. Cindy, why don't you go ahead and pull up verse 12. We're just going to go ahead and start at the end. Everybody stand up one more time. We're going to read the end of where we're going to be today. Trying to keep you awake, be on your toes. You know, there's a great preacher who says, make sure you make the congregation stand at the beginning of the message and read the scripture so you know they're at least awake in that part. So you're all awake now because I made you stand up. If you're not standing, I know you're asleep. But this is the end of the passage we're going to read today. Anybody like to read the end of the story before you read the rest? Anybody? You don't want to admit that you do? A couple of you do? I know sometimes I don't really do it with books. I sometimes like to do it with movies because we don't get to go to very many movies, and so I want to know where the movie's going before I go and don't want to spend my money on something that's going to, ruin the day or have a bunch of messed up stuff in it. But we're going to read the end of the passage. God gives the prophet Ezekiel a vision, and here in verse 12, we get the culmination of that vision, this vision of a river. The vision has in it, God shows Ezekiel, verse 12, on the banks, on both sides of the river, there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail, but they will bear fresh fruit every month because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food and their leaves for healing. You'll have a seat. Their fruit will be for food and their leaves for healing. It sounds like a place of abundance. It sounds like a place of refreshment. Is anybody ever in need of refreshment? Ever? Anybody ever in need of a vacation? There you go. Anybody in need of a vacation when you come back from a vacation? Particularly if you take children, it's not a vacation, it's a trip. Vacation is different. I read a book by a guy one time who had a complete breakdown, a mental, physical, emotional, spiritual breakdown. He burned himself out, and he was writing about this a while later. And he said when it comes to being refreshed, that when we go on a vacation or a refreshing trip, that in order to really feel refreshed, it usually takes a few days to unwind from how wound up you were if you're on a truly refreshing vacation. But he says in order to be truly refreshed on a vacation, you need to plan every day to do for probably a couple hours something that really refreshes your spirit. Something like sitting on a porch reading a book, or something that really brings you true refreshment. You need to plan at least a couple hours every day so at the end of your vacation you are really refreshed, because otherwise you won't really be refreshed. You'll just be constantly running and going and going and going, and you get back and you dump all of the luggage in the laundry room and you collapse and the kids are in bed and you're like, man, that is exhausting and I got to go to work in 2 hours. And he says you really need to have a refreshing moment and spend that time. Well, today we're going to be looking at refreshment and what that truly means, how to be refreshed. In the summer after I graduated college, I was working at a church, and I was working on the youth staff at the time, and we had just hired another guy on the youth staff. We hired several people, and we hired this guy, and the two of us, me and this guy, became really close friends, and we discovered through the course of working together so closely and hanging around each other every day, that my friend, there were some things that he had not learned to get to where he was at 20 years old. He had never learned how to ride a bike, and he had never learned how to swim. And so some of the youth found out about some of these things and actually took him to Walmart to teach him how to ride a bike. Don't ever do that. They pulled one of the bikes off the rack and were teaching him how to ride a bike down the aisles of Walmart. And when they heard the security being called over the PA, they quickly exited Walmart. But we took my friend. I was not on that journey, thankfully. But we took my friend to the house I was staying at with his family. They had a pool. And we were trying to teach him how to swim. And so we thought, all of us, having no idea how to teach someone how to swim, but we started him out in the shallow end, and we were teaching him, the moves you do and what you do with your hands and what you do with your feet. We had him hold on to the side and kick his feet and all this stuff, and we had him go from the steps to the other side of the pool, and he's going to town, and he's really enjoying it. And he says, I got this thing figured out. I'm all over it. And we said, hey, Pat, your feet are on the ground and you're wearing a floaty. You don't have it figured out. And so he was feeling secure after an hour and a half of going this way. So we took him down to the deep end. And in the deep end of some pools, and they had it theirs, they had a diving board, and then on either side of the pool, they had like a little bench on either side of the deep end. And so me and my friend, we were on one side of the deep end, sitting on that bench. And one of the other members of the youth staff was on the other side, on the other bench. And we said, you've got the strokes. We showed you what to do. All you got to do is do the exact same thing. I said, I'm going to be swimming right next to you the whole time, so you can't go anywhere. Literally, I could reach out my hand, and you're there, and I got a hold of you. Nothing's going to happen. And it took us a long time to coach him, to talk him into this. And so he did it, and he finally got going, and it took another 2 hours to finally get him to where he felt secure enough there in the deep end. But he wasn't going to really understand how to swim on his own if he stayed in the shallows. He wasn't going to get any better if he stayed where he could still touch, if he kept the floaty on, because the deeper you go, the more you grow. We can't really grow in the shallows. The shallows really, they stunt our growth. The depths may be unfamiliar at first, but it is only in the depths that we can grow. And God gives Ezekiel, the prophet, a vision of depth in Ezekiel chapter 47. So look with me in this vision that God gives Ezekiel. Ezekiel 47, starting in verse 1. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple. And behold, water was issuing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. The water was flowing down from below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. So God gives Ezekiel this vision of the temple. And the temple, if you've been here for very long, you've heard me say it before, the temple was representative of God's Spirit. And the temple was in Jerusalem, which Jerusalem represented the heart of the nation. So it's God's Spirit in the heart of the nation. And so flowing from the temple is this water. It's issuing, it says, issuing from below the threshold. Actually, the other day, I pulled into the church after lunch and noticed water issuing from our church. And this scripture popped into mind. That's the Spirit of God flowing from. But no, a water line had broke, and Charles Turner was up here fixing it. And that's neither here nor there. We thank God for Charles and all the work he does. But this wasn't a broken water line. This was water flowing under the threshold, leaving the temple. And the water is flowing from the temple. So the water is God's Spirit flowing out into the world. Okay? Verse 2. Then he brought me out by way of the north gate, and led me around the outside to the outer gate that faces towards the east. And behold, the water was trickling out on the south side. So now we get a better picture of the water here. He says before the water is issuing from below the threshold, and now he tells us how quickly the water is coming. It's trickling. The water is just trickling out from the temple. It's just going a little bit, not going incredibly fast, not overwhelming. It's just trickling from the temple right up there by the temple. Verse 3. Going on eastward with a measuring line in his hand, the man measured 1,000 cubits, and then he led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. Now, a cubit is about 18 inches. It's about 1.5 feet. They would usually measure, a cubit was like from your elbow to your wrist, give or take, and depending on how, big of a person you were, it would be how long the cubit was you were measuring, but give or take, it's about 18 inches. And so this guy measures 18 inches, and he measures 1,000 cubits, okay, 1,800 feet. And he led me, or 1.5 feet, that's what, 1,500 feet. Led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. ankle deep water. So picture as we're going here. It's trickling from the temple, so it's just trickling. That's not any deep. That's not even a puddle. He says he measures out 1,000 cubits, and 1,000 cubits out, it's ankle deep. So the water's getting a little bit deeper here, but it's not incredibly deep yet. 1,000 cubits, and it's only ankle deep from the trickling of the temple. Look at verse 4. Again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was knee deep. Again he measured 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was waist deep. So we get the image here that the water's getting deeper. And it seems the further you go, the deeper, the faster the depths are growing. If he went 1,000 cubits and it was only ankle deep, and then he went another 1,000 cubits and this time it was knee deep, that second 1,000 has increased a lot. And then he went another 1,000 and this time it's waist deep. And so I'm picturing in my mind, the only way to know how deep it is, that God is making Ezekiel walk out into the water to see how deep it is. He's measuring the distance and making Ezekiel walk out and see how deep it is. Ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep. So we see where this is going. Verse 5. Again, he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass through. For the water has risen, and it was deep enough to swim in. A river that could not be passed through. So this time, it's even higher than Ezekiel's head. He can't walk through it. The only way to get through it is to swim. So it went from a trickle to ankle to knee to waist to too high to even know how deep it is. The further that it went from the temple, it was a trickle at first, but it became incredibly deep later on. You see, because the more that the water flowed, the deeper it became. The more it flows, the deeper it goes. It was just a trickle up by the temple. When they started on their journey, it was just a trickle. But the further they got, the deeper it went. And the deeper it went, it became this massive thing. He called it a river, flowing so much you can't even cross it. The more that it flows out, the deeper it goes. And now we are going to see in a minute, this water is God's Spirit. And we saw from verse 12 that we kick this thing off with, that this river is life-bringing. This river brings abundance. This river brings healing, brings fruit for our lives that enables us to accomplish much. It says the fruit never fails. And so this is an amazing river. This Spirit of God that is flowing is amazing. It may start as a trickle, even in our lives, it may start as a trickle, but then it becomes something massive. The further we go with Christ in our journey, the deeper it goes. As long as we don't stay up by the trickle, we've got to keep on moving. We can't be content with the trickle. We got to keep going where Jesus wants us to go. We got to keep following the line of where Jesus has us going, continuing in our journey with Him. We can't spend our entire life's journey with Christ up by the trickle, only engaging with the trickle. We've got to let it flow and follow the flow. A more accurate way to say that, let it flow, because this water, let it flow, represents the Spirit of God, and the Spirit of God is not an it. It is a He. So we've got to let Him flow, not just around us. We've got to let the Spirit flow in us, because when He flows in us, He will flow through us. We can't be a dead end for the Spirit of God. We've got to let Him come and go through. We've got to let Him pass through. Let Him flow. Don't be a blockage in the path of the Spirit of God. Verse 6. And He said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then He led me back to the bank of the river. As I went back, I saw on the bank of the river very many trees on the one side and on the other. And He said to me, this water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah and enters the sea. When the water flows into the sea, the water will become fresh. Now, some of that may not mean much to you. The Arabah enters the sea. What kind of sea is he talking about here? What is the sea? Well, in this particular region, the Arabah, the water flowing toward the eastern region into that sea, this is the Dead Sea he's talking about. So this life-giving water that is producing all of these trees flows into the Dead Sea, and it says the water will become fresh. The water he's talking about isn't the water of the river. The river is already fresh. The water that's going to become fresh is the Dead Sea. The river will make what is dead come alive. Now, you know what's interesting about the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea is about 25%-ish, depending on the year and the temperature and the weather, 25% salt and minerals. And the oceans are only about 4%. So that is a massive increase of minerals that are in the Dead Sea. And those minerals that accumulate aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves. Some of those minerals are magnesium and calcium, potassium, boron, iron, zinc, and they have all kinds of great potential within them if they are by themselves outside of the Dead Sea. They have benefits to the skin, benefits to the hair. They can even relieve stressed nerves and do some amazing things. But when they are all accumulated in this context, those things that were good can eliminate any life that was there. Because too much good chokes out the great. Too much good chokes out the great. You could have a great potential to do something great, but if you allow too much good, you will never be able to accomplish the great. Sometimes we say yes to too many things that are good in our schedule, but that doesn't leave any room for great. Or we try to accomplish too many good things, never really accomplishing something great. Maybe we say yes to too many people because we don't want to upset too many people, but in doing so, we have to say no to our kids. Or say no to our spouse. Or say no to the life that God has implanted within us, the ministry He has put in our family, and we don't really accomplish something great there because we're doing too many good things other places. Too much good chokes out the great, and in no greater picture is that than in the Dead Sea. Those minerals, that salt, that's all good stuff. But in that context, it chokes out all life. It kills it all. Not just life that could be there, that would be, but all potential for life is eradicated because there's too much good that has accumulated, preventing any potential great that could be there. Too much good chokes out the great. All that Dead Sea accumulates, all those minerals, it chokes out all that light. And in a different context, all those things are good things, and people take those things out and they sell them in shops. And you can bring them back and say, hey, it's Dead Sea salt. It can, work miracles in your life. When those things, though, that salt and minerals, when they come together and they pile up in the Dead Sea, they pile up on each other, it brings destruction. It destroys life because all that good prevents the great. Good is in reality the enemy of the great. Good is the enemy of great because too often we experience something good and we settle for the good when if we just take one more step, we could experience something great. Good is the enemy of great, prevents great. Good provides or prevents what could be great. Good is a place of settlement, even though we should see good and move on into great. Good is the enemy of great. So he sees this river, Ezekiel. He sees the accumulation of all that is there, the deadness that is there, the river flowing into the Dead Sea, and we see something that is miraculous, the Dead Sea becoming fresh. The Dead Sea becoming fresh. This water that's coming in to what is dead brings life where there was no life. It brings new life to where there never has been life before. Verse 9. Wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live. And there will be very many fish, for this water goes there, that the waters of the sea may become fresh. So everything will live where the river goes. Fishermen will stand beside the sea from En-Gedi to Eneglaim. It will be a place for the spreading of nets. Its fish will be of very many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. But its swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They will be left for salt. So the swamps and the marshes, there will still be a place for the good things to go. The salt and the minerals, they will accumulate in these swamps and in these marshes. But the Dead Sea itself, the river flowing into the Dead Sea, will be where the life is, will be where the abundance is. Verse 12 that we read earlier, and on the banks, on both sides of the river, there will grow all kinds of trees for food. Their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit fail, but they will bear fresh fruit every month, because the water for them flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for healing. So all of this freshness, all of this life that was not there before, the freshness, the life, it comes from the flow of the river. It comes from the flow of the river. And so we can ask ourselves all day long, am I in need of a refreshment? We sung a minute ago about being revived. Am I in need of being revived? Am I on the verge of a breakdown? And am I on the verge of complete exhaustion? Am I on the verge of reaching the end of my rope, burning the candle at both ends? Do I need to be refreshed and experience that fresh fruit he's talking about? Because your amount of spiritual freshness comes straight out of the Spirit's flow. We can be spiritually refreshed, spiritually revived, but it comes from the Spirit of God. It comes from God's Holy Spirit flowing into our lives. We can't regurgitate some past revival we've had because we hear the same song we heard in some spiritual experience we experienced in the past and it gives us all the feels. That is a fake freshness. That is a mask covering what is truly underneath. True spiritual refreshment comes from the Spirit of God, not from a song, not from a quote that you heard from somebody years ago, not even from a physical context of a physical room that you happen to be in. It comes from the Spirit of God and nothing else. He is the only one who can bring you freshness. He is the only one who can bring you revival. He is the only one who can invigorate what was dead before. Your amount of spiritual freshness comes straight out of the Spirit's flow. It is, now catch that word, it's the flow of the Spirit. It's not the trickle that's up by the temple. That trickle is important because that's where the journey begins. And early on in our journey with Christ, all we can handle is the trickle. That's all we can take because we're not prepared for the flow. If we had taken my friend and thrown him in the deep end before spending those several hours teaching him how to swim, he would have drowned. He would never have been able to accomplish what we got him to where he was because he started in the shallows and then moved to the deep. You got to start with the trickle before you can get to the river, before you can jump in with the flow. But you notice Ezekiel, as he is walking the river with the Spirit of God, he is able to go deeper the further he goes. Because the further you go with the Spirit, the greater your depth capacity. The further you go with the Spirit, the greater your depth capacity, the more you are able to experience, the more you are able to handle if you're walking with the Spirit in the journey. You see, if you're not walking with the Spirit, then you can't handle the deep. If you're not walking with the Spirit, you can't go into the deep. You can't even handle the waist deep. You've got to be with the Spirit in order to handle any of it. Otherwise, all we can handle is the trickle. But notice something that is very unique in the passage. The fresh fruit, the healing leaves, they're not by the trickle. They're by the flowing river. They're by the flowing depths. The trickle has to be there in order to get the flowing depths, but the healing leaves and the abundance are not by the trickle. They're further down the journey. They're further down the journey. You've got to continue on in the journey to get to where God has for you to be, to experience the freshness of the fruit and the healing of the leaves. The flowing depths are where the healing comes. But even in that, the flowing river, we can set up a blockage that prevents the river from flowing into our lives, even from flowing into somebody else. We got to beware of blockage because blockage prevention is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process. It's a daily thing. You've got to keep your mind aware of the blockage that could potentially prevent you from accomplishing what God wants you to accomplish or from reaching the depths of where the trees really are. The blockage that we set up sometimes, and we set up blockages in our spiritual lives by not spending time in the Word, by not praying, By focusing on too much on what we can accomplish in our own strength and in our own cleverness and in our own savings and in our own bank account, and we don't depend enough on faith and what God can do through us and in us if we would simply rely on the Spirit. And we set up these blockages in our lives. And sometimes we don't even realize they're there. Maybe it's a blockage of bitterness or of a lack of trust. Maybe in God, or maybe it's a lack of trust in other people because you've been burned so many times by so many other people that you don't want to trust anybody else. And so you've set up all these blockages to prevent anyone else from hurting you, but in doing so, you're preventing your own spiritual growth because of the blockages that have been set up. And so we've got to practice consistent blockage prevention. Just in the same way that bodily health is the result of many decisions made over a long period of time. Whether healthy or unhealthy, it's a result of many decisions over a long period of time. Even if you don't want to make the decision, you got to make the decision of whether you're going to do it or not. You got to trust in the process. If you wake up in the morning, you say, I'm too tired to spend time in the Word. I'm too tired, take it in bodily health. I'm too tired to exercise. I'm too tired to extend my hand for the good food. I'll reach the extra 6 inches for the Bluebell. I do that often. Those 6 inches are worth it sometimes, many, many times. But for instance, I woke up this morning exhausted. You ever wake up tired? You say, I don't think the sleep worked. I think my sleepometer is broken. And it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, And so I woke up tired this morning. And I've got a routine in the morning. You've heard me talk about it before. I do it every day, but especially on Sundays. Sundays need to have the routine down or it's going to mess me all up, both mentally and emotionally and particularly spiritually. So I've got to have the routine. I get up and I get coffee, caffeine. The coffee bean was one of God's great gifts to humanity. And so I got to get the coffee, and I go in the other room, and I sit in this chair. It was actually a glider we got for the babies, but there isn't room, and so it's in this other room, and that's where I spend my time with the Lord, is in this great glider. Although on mornings when I'm tired, it ends up being a prayer nap, more so than a prayer. Anybody ever have a prayer nap? I'm the only one, apparently. Thank you. Made me feel stranded on an island up here. But so I get my coffee and I go in there, I spend time with the Lord, and then I work out for a while, and then the kids get up and we eat breakfast and all this jazz. Well, this morning when my alarm went off, I did not want to wake up. And you ever have those arguments in your mind? Most of the times with yourself. Although this morning I realized later on it was an argument with God who was saying, get up. And I was arguing, saying, no, I'm tired. I hit the off, and I don't know about you, I never hit the snooze on my alarm. I always turn it off. Even if I'm, asleep, I don't hit snooze. Even in the past, when I've set several alarms, I will, in my sleep, turn off all of them when the first one goes off. And so I turn it off, and I'm arguing with myself. I do not want to give up. I'm too tired. I could use that extra sleep. But I know, wait, it's Sunday. You got to get up. You got to get up. So after a few minutes of arguing with myself, I get up, get the coffee, go in there, spend time with the Lord, take a minor prayer nap, spend more time praying, and then go through the rest of the morning routine. Because I know, even though in the moment I may want to sleep more, I know if I'm going to be any kind of effective for God, I've got to trust in the process. I've got to go to the river. I've got to go to the river, because the river's where the life is. Even if I may feel out of life, even if I may feel like I haven't experienced refreshment or haven't experienced life in a long time, I've still got to go to the river because I know the river is where the life will come. I can't get life because with the extra 30 minutes of sleep. That's not going to bring me life. I can't get life even from eating healthy, although you should, so you can spend more time in this world and more time for Jesus. Life really doesn't come from that. Life comes from the river flowing in your life, from the Spirit flowing in your life. And you've got to go to the river to get the life. And so that's what I had to come to the conclusion of myself this morning, even though I lost those few minutes in the arguing with myself. The extra sleep was not going to bring the refreshment that was needed. That would only come from God's Word and His Spirit speaking through it. It won't come from me trying to manufacture energy, from pumping more caffeine, from making an extra pot of coffee. It's not going to come from any of that. The true refreshment can only come from God's Spirit. So I had to remove that blockage that was in my life. And so we need to open the floodgates and wade out further and further into the Spirit of God. Because out there in the flowing depths, there's no withering. You ever feel like you're withering? You ever feel battle weary? Like you just can't do it anymore? Like you're exhausted and your brain can't take it, and you're tired of the mess at work, and you're tired of the mess on TV, and you're tired of the mess in your family, and you're just tired of being tired. And you're just exhausted all over it. Well, you will continue to be exhausted if you're not going to the flow. If you're not going to the river. Because growing happens where the Spirit is flowing. Growing happens where the Spirit is flowing. And people can mask the flowing of the Spirit. They can put up this front and it can look like God is flowing in their lives. We're good at that. We have developed this system to fake the Spirit of God. Some people don't like to talk about the Spirit of God. Baptists have a long history of not wanting to talk about the Spirit of God. And we can fake it all day long. Oh, praise Jesus. I'm all over that. Yes, that's good. I'll pray for you. And then we never do. How are you doing? Great. I'll put you on my prayer list. But we forget anything that happened in that conversation the second we turn and walk away. You know, part of going to the flow is being in constant communication with the Lord. So if you say, I'm going to pray for somebody, pray in the moment right then. Pray before you walk away. I know a guy who will not even say, can I pray for you? If somebody expresses a need, in the middle of the conversation, he will start praying. Even while I've had this happen. I was talking. In the middle of my sentence, he started praying. So I stopped and bowed my head. Okay, it's time to pray. Pray with them. Don't wait till later because you're going to forget. Pray right then. Go to the flowing of the Spirit, because growing follows the Spirit's flowing. And as the Spirit is flowing in you and through you, you will continue to grow. If you are encouraging somebody else through prayer or through an encouraging word, that is the Spirit flowing through you. But as He flows through you, you are growing. You're no longer up by the trickle. You're down there by the flowing depths that are producing the abundant fruit and the healing leaves. You grow where the Spirit flows. If there's no Spirit flowing in you, there is no growing in you. We've created a blockage somewhere. Whether it's a 75% blockage or a 99% blockage, whatever the blockage is, we have set it up and prevented the Spirit's flowing. It may be the Spirit has been prevented from flowing in your own personal life, and if that's the case, then the Spirit is not flowing as ample as He needs to in your family, in those around you. Because we are supposed to be conduits for the flowing of the Spirit, not a simple, receptacle for the flowing of the Spirit. It's the image of the woman with the oil in the Old Testament when she's supposed to take the jar and pour it into all the other jars. The jar continues to pour as long as she has something else to pour into. We're supposed to be continually pouring into those around us what we have contained within us. But if we don't have enough of the Spirit within us to pour into somebody else, then we're relying too much on the trickle and haven't gone far enough into the flow. We've got to let it flow to see ourselves grow. So how much of the Spirit do you have? How much refreshment do you have within you? Are you continuing to go to the flow every day and be a part in His Word and in prayer? Do you feel constantly exhausted and battle weary and beaten down? Well, the answer to that is right here. Right here. You can take it and ingest it. You can memorize it. I've got a stack of memory cards sitting on my shelf that I created, and I put a verse on a card, and I'm OCD, so I didn't have to write it. I had to type it up and print it out so it looks nice. And Caleb actually saw them on the counter the other day and asked if it was every verse in the Bible. And I said, no, it's only a few. Because when they're stacked up, they look pretty thick, but it wasn't really. But we've got to take these verses and we've got to contain them within us and keep them with us because they are the things that will give us life. The Spirit will speak through His Word and empower you to do more than you ever thought possible. You think Paul was some great man. He was a great man because he had the Word and the Spirit flowing in him. Billy Graham was a great man, not because he was great. Billy Graham was a great man because he was a conduit for the Spirit of God. If you've ever watched one of his sermons, it's simple. It's the gospel. But he allowed the Spirit of God to flow through him into tens of thousands of people who heard him speak at any given time and saw millions of people come to Christ. Because he wasn't a dead end for the Spirit. He allowed the Spirit to flow. You grow where the Spirit flows. Is the Spirit flowing in your life? Are you going to the river to pray? Are you going to the river for life? Are you going to the river every day? Now you got to start somewhere, and if you've never started in your journey with Christ, you've got to start with the trickle up by the temple. You've got to believe that Jesus is the Son of God and He died so all your sins would be forgiven. So you could start this journey with Him. And then He rose from the dead so that you can live after you die. So that death brings joy because of where you are going, not because of what is ending. So you have to start. And then once you start, you continue your journey with the Spirit. So if you've never started your journey with the Spirit, do it today. Come and talk to me here in just a minute when we sing our last song. Come and talk to Micah. Come and catch us after the service. We'd love to talk to you about it. Love to settle the matter today. But maybe you need to go to the river. Go to the flow. Maybe you've been feeling overwhelmed by everything that's going on in the world or in your world, and you don't know what to do. You feel battle weary and battle worn, and you wake up exhausted. You maintain an existence of exhaustion, and you go to sleep exhausted, and you don't know where you can be refreshed, where your spirit can find refreshment. Well, even in the exhaustion, even in the storm, even in the battle, refreshment can come if we're going to the river and experiencing the Spirit of God. So maybe you need to come to experience a fresh flowing in your life.